The cold winds of Clithar's barren moon cut through Marcus Hale's uniform like tiny needles, and yet he barely noticed. His focus was on the mission: retrieve the stolen energy core before the enemy could reverse engineer it into a weapon that could vaporize whole colonies. "I swear, whoever designed these suits never met wind," he muttered, pulling the hood tighter. Somewhere behind him, Corporal Jet groaned, slipping on a patch of lunar ice. "You'd think the military would at least give us something that doesn't double as a straitjacket," Jet complained, brushing himself off. Marcus smirked. "They prefer their soldiers stiff, Jet. Easier to march them to the grave." The squad's transport hovered above the jagged crater where intelligence reported the energy core was hidden. The crater seemed uninhabited at first glance, save for the usual rocky spires and the occasional glow of bioluminescent minerals that gave Clithar a strangely festive appearance. "Festive if your idea of a party is near death," Marcus said, earning a chuckle from Jet. Then she appeared. Marcus had trained for years against human adversaries, aliens with 4 arms, sentient AI drones, even spacefaring beasts that looked like floating brontosauruses. But nothing had prepared him for Liara. At first glance, she looked almost human, graceful, lean, and strikingly poised, but the long, elegant ears sweeping back from her temples immediately marked her as alien. Her eyes, bright with intelligence and a hint of mischief, scanned the terrain as if the moon itself had secrets to whisper. "Are we expecting company?" Jet whispered, his tone a mix of awe and irritation. Marcus had no answer. He barely trusted himself to breathe. Liara tilted her head slightly and raised one eyebrow, the motion precise and utterly unnerving. Then she smiled, a small curve that suggested she knew the joke before anyone else had a chance to tell it. Without warning, the enemy fired. Plasma bolts streaked across the crater, turning the mineral glows into an eerie strobe. The soldiers dived behind cover, returning fire with disciplined precision. Marcus peeked from behind a jagged rock and was about to yell, "Watch your..." when Liara sprang forward, moving with a fluidity that defied gravity. She dropped a small device that emitted a sudden burst of holographic duplicates of herself, each one waving and brandishing a weapon that didn't exist. The enemy hesitated, unsure which figure to target. "Oh, this is fun," she called, darting between the decoys. "Didn't anyone teach them mirrors are useful?" Marcus blinked, momentarily stunned. Did she just joke? He muttered, then ducked as a plasma bolt scorched the rock beside him. Liara continued her display, weaving between cover and holograms, and her long ears twitched with each movement, sensing vibrations too subtle for human perception. A trap triggered by her device caused a section of mineral spires to collapse, narrowly missing the enemy but forcing them into chaos. Marcus found himself grinning despite the danger. "Okay, she's insane. And brilliant," he admitted aloud. As the firefight continued, Liara's tactics became even more audacious. She tossed a microgravity grenade, sending one squad of enemies floating helplessly into the air before laughing, "Careful. Don't forget to breathe." The human soldiers, initially tense and ready for a conventional assault, started laughing mid-combat, exchanging incredulous glances. Marcus dodged another plasma bolt, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've trained for 15 years, and she just turned combat into a carnival game." The tide turned quickly. The enemy's precision faltered, and their communications were jammed by one of Liara's ingenious gadgets, a small device that emitted interference pulses perfectly tuned to their neural implants. "Honestly, I think they should have stuck to gardening," she quipped as a group of enemy soldiers scrambled in disarray. Marcus caught himself smiling at the audacity of it all. Finally, Liara moved to retrieve the energy core herself. She approached the glowing cylinder with cautious precision, then paused and waved at Marcus. "Try not to drool, soldier. I can feel it." The human couldn't help but laugh, muttering, "You've got an ego as big as your tactical mind." As she lifted the core, a final enemy burst came from the ridge, but Liara didn't panic. Instead, she used a miniature gravity pulse to send them tumbling backward like ragdolls. One soldier landed awkwardly atop a mineral formation, groaning. "Maybe they'll rethink their career choices," Liara said dryly, adjusting the energy core under her arm. Marcus shook his head as he covered her retreat. No one could have predicted this, except apparently her. Back at the edge of the crater, as the human soldiers regrouped and prepared to depart, Marcus finally allowed himself to speak without caution. Liara, you just rewrote the book on combat. She grinned, ears twitching, and replied, books are overrated. Besides, I prefer footnotes and explosions. As the transport lifted off, leaving the crater and the scattered, defeated enemy behind, Marcus couldn't help but glance at her in awe. She was human enough to understand humor, alien enough to seem untouchable, and brilliant enough to make him wonder how he had ever survived missions before meeting her. Somewhere in the vastness of Clithar's skies, he realized that strategy, intelligence, and courage could always find a way to win, especially when paired with wit and a flair for the dramatic. And somewhere deep down, Marcus knew he was going to be laughing about this mission for the rest of his career. The transport hummed through the black expanse of space, its engines vibrating softly beneath Marcus Hale's boots. He leaned against the railing, watching the stars streak by as if they were impatient to get somewhere. Behind him, Liara sat cross-legged on the floor, effortlessly balancing a tiny gravity sphere between her hands. Ever try juggling with zero-G? She asked, bouncing the sphere with a flick of her fingers. It's oddly calming. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Calming, or a way to make me feel completely inadequate. She gave a mock gasp, her long ears tilting in feigned offense. You're just intimidated by skill, that's understandable. Jet, sprawled across a nearby bench, groaned. I'm pretty sure he's intimidated by everything. He gestured toward Marcus, who gave him a glare sharp enough to slice metal. Liara laughed, a soft, musical sound that seemed almost out of place among the hum of machinery. You humans are so predictable, she said, flipping the sphere from hand to hand. I do like that about you. The atmosphere on the transport was deceptively light. In truth, the stolen energy core in Liara's possession was a ticking potential disaster. If intercepted, it could empower any number of factions to obliterate entire star systems. The fact that they had survived the Clithar ambush was miraculous, but Marcus knew the real challenge was only beginning. Course, he muttered, nothing says relaxing flight like the possibility of dying in space. Liara's ears twitched. You worry too much, dying is overrated, mostly messy, and you can't enjoy a decent cup of synth coffee afterward. Marcus laughed despite himself. That's actually fair. The transport jolted suddenly, sending unsecured equipment sliding across the floor. Intruders, Liara said, her voice calm, almost amused. Her eyes glinted with sharp calculation. The holographic display in front of her flickered to life, revealing a small fleet of sleek, angular ships cutting across their trajectory. Looks like someone didn't get the memo that Clithar is my territory now. Marcus scrambled to his station. They're fast, shields at 70% weight, they're outmaneuvering us. Liara stood, adjusting her jacket with casual precision, the gravity sphere still twirling in one hand. Don't panic, she said. Panic is for amateurs and apparently most humans. The enemy ships fired, and a series of red streaks sliced through the darkness, narrowly missing the transport. Liara casually dropped the gravity sphere onto the floor where it floated and pulsed softly, generating a microgravitational field that disrupted the enemy ship's trajectory. One ship spun out of control, its pilot shouting in a language Marcus didn't recognize. I swear, Liara said, hands on her hips, if I had a dime for every overconfident pilot thinking they could chase me, I'd have a lot of dimes. And probably a small moon. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. You make it look too easy. Of course I do, she replied. You humans like the dramatic flair, it's part of your charm. Her ears flicked as the remaining enemy ships regrouped. Okay, time for Plan B. She moved quickly to the transport's navigation panel, her fingers dancing across controls that Marcus had never seen before. Tiny drones deployed from the ship's hull, each projecting a holographic image of the transport itself. The enemy fleet fired again, only to find themselves striking empty air as the real transport zipped away behind a shimmering cloak of light. See, Liara said, leaning casually against the console. Drama maintained, casualty count 0. Marcus couldn't help but grin. You're enjoying this way too much. Liara's grin widened. Enjoyment is tactical, never forget that. Hours passed, and the laughter-filled tension of their escape gave way to quiet conversation. Marcus was fascinated by Liara, not just her combat genius, but her perspective on life. She spoke of worlds where gravity was reversed, where flora had sentience, and where humor was considered a form of diplomacy. Her tales were punctuated with dry jokes, each one landing with perfect timing. And then, she said, twirling one of her long ears around her finger absent-mindedly, the ambassador argued that my joke about quantum soup was offensive. I told him, buddy, it's soup. It's supposed to be liquid and confusing. He didn't laugh, obviously. Marcus laughed aloud, shaking his head. I think that's my favorite story about you so far. Lucky you, she replied, eyes sparkling. Most people think I'm terrifying. Little do they know, I've got humor as my hidden weapon. The transport hummed steadily, but the sensors picked up a faint signal, an unregistered ship trailing them silently. Marcus tensed. Liara, we've got company. She tilted her head, her ears twitching with interest rather than fear. Ah, yes, the predictable element, let's make this fun. She moved to the control panel again, pulling up a detailed schematic of the pursuing ship. It's a stealth frigate. Standard stealth tech, but poorly calibrated. I can play with that. Marcus watched in awe as Liara deployed a series of decoys, each emitting false energy readings that led the enemy into a looping chase pattern. Then she activated a small device on the floor, which produced a brief pulse of gravitational interference, sending the pursuing ship spinning in slow-motion pirouettes through space. It's a space ballet, she said, arms spread as if conducting. Graceful, tragic, but mostly hilarious. The enemy ship, now flailing and useless, broadcast a desperate surrender signal. Liara leaned back, her long ears flicking once in satisfaction. And that, my dear humans, is why you don't underestimate brains over brawn or style over lasers. Marcus shook his head, trying to catch his breath. I don't even have words. Liara shrugged, tapping a finger to her temple. You'll get used to it, eventually, maybe. As the transport resumed its course toward the human base, Marcus found himself reflecting not just on the mission, but on the alien beside him. Liara's brilliance, audacity, and humor had turned what could have been a deadly chase into a showcase of ingenuity and laughter. Somewhere between the zero-G juggling and enemy humiliation, Marcus realized that survival in space wasn't just about strength or firepower. It was about quick thinking, adaptability, and the occasional well-timed joke. Liara, catching him staring, smirked, planning on daydreaming or actually helping with navigation, soldier. Helping, Marcus said quickly, though a small grin tugged at his lips. Mostly learning how not to be terrible at everything you do. She laughed, the sound mingling with the hum of the engines and the distant glimmer of stars. Good, there's hope for you yet. And in that small moment, suspended between the cold void of space and the warmth of her presence, Marcus knew that this partnership, improbable, chaotic, and hilarious, was going to change everything. Not just for the mission, but for how he saw the universe itself. The transport shuddered as it entered the orbit of Zorath Prime, a planet whose surface was scarred by centuries of war, crisscrossed with the deep grooves of previous battles. Marcus Hale adjusted his harness, the familiar weight of the stolen energy core under Liara's protective case reminding him that the true test wasn't over. Their previous skirmishes had been training exercises in comparison to what awaited them. The warlord known only as Kael'thar, a being of brute force and reputation that inspired fear across multiple systems. You know, Marcus muttered, leaning against the wall, I really hoped the universe would let me retire before I met a guy who makes me feel like a warm-up act. Liara's ears twitched as she glanced at him, a sly smile tugging at her lips. Oh, I think you'll survive, maybe, probably, depends on how dramatic we want this finale to be. The surface of Zorath Prime came into view through the transport's viewport. The warlord's fortress loomed atop jagged cliffs, a monstrous spire of blackened alloy and pulsating energy conduits. Marcus felt the familiar knot of tension in his stomach. Years of combat had taught him fear, discipline, and caution, but this was something else entirely. Liara walked over, examining the schematics of the fortress projected in midair. Kael'thar's security is straightforward, she said, tapping at the controls. Lots of firepower, heavy shields, predictable patrol patterns, classic brute force thinking, my favorite kind to confuse. Marcus frowned. And you're sure this will work? One wrong move and we're toast. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. Relax, soldier, you worry too much, where's your sense of theater? As they prepared for descent, Liara deployed a series of miniature drones equipped with cloaking fields and false energy signatures. Marcus watched as the drones zipped toward the fortress, creating multiple phantom transports that danced and shimmered in the sky like mischievous fireflies. Kael'thur's defenses flared in response, firing at illusions while the real transport slipped beneath radar, unnoticed. Once inside the fortress, they encountered the first wave of guards. Marcus expected the usual firefight, but Liara had other ideas. She produced a small device that emitted a pulse of telepathic disorientation, causing the guards to argue and bicker loudly in their alien tongue. One accidentally activated a turret on themselves, spinning in circles while shouting incomprehensibly. Liara's ears twitched with amusement as she whispered, "I call this technique confuse and amuse." Highly underrated. Marcus, taking cover behind a metal column, couldn't help but laugh despite the danger. I can't believe that worked." "Of course it worked," she said, glancing back with a grin. "Brains over brawn, my dear soldier, always." They moved deeper into the fortress, encountering increasingly sophisticated defenses. Laser grids shifted unpredictably, automated drones swooped down from hidden alcoves, and gravity wells attempted to pin them to the floor. Liara countered each obstacle with quick thinking, improvisation, and, oddly, humor. At one point, she used a reflective energy panel to bounce a laser into a surveillance drone, frying it, and quipped, "Note to self. Lasers are like cats, they obey the reflective surfaces better than direct orders." Finally, they reached the central chamber where Kael'thur awaited, a towering figure in blackened exo-armor, energy blades glowing ominously. Marcus felt the weight of inevitability, but Liara stepped forward without hesitation. Her long ears twitched as she observed him, calculating. "Ah, the famous brute," she murmured. "Predictable, overconfident, and ripe for humiliation." Kael'thur roared and charged, swinging his massive blade. Marcus raised his weapon, but Liara didn't move to fight conventionally. Instead, she activated a sequence of devices that disrupted the gravity fields around Kael'thur's feet, causing him to stumble. Then she deployed holographic duplicates of herself, surrounding him from every angle. The warlord, blinded by illusions and struggling against the gravitational distortions, swung wildly at phantoms. One miscalculated swing sent him crashing into the energy conduit, which sparked and shorted out. Marcus watched in awe as Liara continued her symphony of chaos, combining technology, cunning, and perfectly timed quips. "Careful, you're going to break something priceless," she said, dodging another swing. Kael'thur yelled in frustration, his roar echoing through the chamber like a broken alarm. Liara exploited the confusion further, using the energy core itself as a bait. She suspended it in a controlled gravity field above Kael'thur's head. He lunged, only to trigger a containment field that pinned him in place. With one final touch of her device, Kael'thur's weapons were neutralized, and the warlord collapsed to his knees, utterly defeated. Liara's ears twitched as she straightened, her expression calm and almost regal. "And that, my bulky friend," she said, "is why cunning, courage, and style beat brute force. Every single time." Marcus approached, still panting, a mixture of relief and admiration on his face. I have no idea how you did all that without breaking a sweat." She tilted her head, ears flicking. "Practice, observation, and a healthy disdain for predictable combat tactics. Also, I like watching people panic a little, it's entertaining." As they exited the fortress with the energy core secured, Marcus felt a strange lightness in his chest. He realized he had changed, not just in skill but in perspective. Brute force and rigid adherence to rules were not always the path to victory. He had learned that intelligence, adaptability, and even humor could turn the tide of war. And more importantly, he had learned to trust in the unexpected brilliance of others. Back aboard the transport, Liara floated a small distance from him, adjusting her long ears with a flick. "You survived," she said. "Not badly, either. A little clumsy, but I suppose charm makes up for it." Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "Charm won't win battles